and restart. So, Mark, again, I'll turn it over to you to do a deeper overview of the next presentation, and we'll have our presenters up.
All right, thank you very much, Teddy. So the Partnership for Connected Minnesota, which you heard alluded to earlier, is a public-private partnership created by philanthropic and business leaders in collaboration with Governor Tim Walz in the wake of COVID-19 to ensure students from high-need and underserved communities have the tools and support they need to participate in digital learning and digital life. I think they took that right from their website. So I will introduce, on the call we have Ann Hoyt-Taft, the Associate Vice President of Community Impact from St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation, and Dustin Moritz, the Community Initiatives Program Manager, also with the St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation. And Dustin, I think you're going to take it over for the presentation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. I'm going to start sharing my screen here. Just give me one moment, please.
Yep, no worries. If you do run into a problem, we do have a backup for it, so just keep that in mind.
Awesome, thanks so much. I tried this earlier.
Oh, there we go, there it is.
Oh, perfect, wonderful. Thanks for your patience, everyone. So first of all, thank you, Mark, for inviting me to talk to you all today. As Mark said, my name is Dustin Moritz. I'm the Community Initiatives Program Manager at the St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation, and I have the pleasure of working with the Partnership for Connected Minnesota. So what is Connected Minnesota? Mark gave a great introduction, and I actually was going to use that same language, where the partnership created by philanthropic and business leaders, convened by the Office of the Governor and Lieutenant Governor in the wake of COVID-19, to ensure that Minnesota students from high-need and underserved communities have the tech devices and the high-speed internet connectivity they need to participate in digital learning and digital life. And as many of you know, the pandemic revealed and further exacerbated the stark inequities in our society. And as it pertains to education, I'm preaching to the choir here, but access to the technology, internet access, and other services that were critical to participate in distance learning was by no means universal in our state or across the nation. And so this was the impetus for our formation. And we came together to respond and engage and work to build a more equitable, resilient state where each and every student can learn, thrive, and prosper. And so our founding partners were the St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation, the Blandon Foundation, Best Buy, Comcast, and the Minnesota Business Partnership. And we've gotten some awesome support at various moments from the Minnesota Children's Cabinet, Minnesota Department of Education, hello Jeff, as well as later on the Southwest Initiative Foundation. And so with founding partners working in the fields of business and philanthropy, we were particularly well positioned to fundraise and respond with quick grant making to support nonprofits, local agencies, and other intermediaries that would work to ensure that K-12 students had the tools they needed to connect and engage around school, health, and more throughout the course of the pandemic. So Connected Minnesota determined our grant-making priorities using recommendations from key partners across the state, including leaders in education, nonprofits serving K-12 students, education technology experts, and representatives from the Children's Cabinet and MDE. The focus was on students across the state from communities most in need, including students who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color, students from low-income families, and students residing in rural Minnesota. And we focused on supporting three key outcomes, and you'll see them briefly described on the screen, and I'll dig into them a little bit more. The first is that students in high-need communities have tech devices, ensuring more equitable access to educational resources now and in the future. The second is that young people in both rural and urban communities have reliable, affordable broadband access. And the third is that students and providers have the tools that they need to connect and engage around school, physical and mental health, and future career pathways. So what has our work looked like to date? Well, we have had two great funding rounds. In September 2020, we were able to distribute just over $2 million to 23 organizations across the state. And I think that first grant round, most of the grant funding went to Greater Minnesota. And then in March 2021, we were able to distribute $2.3 million or so to 29 organizations in collaboration with the Minnesota Business Coalition for Racial Equity, which were just phenomenal fundraising partners for us to engage in that second grant round. In the grant making, the geographic emphasis in that grant round ended up being the Twin Cities. We also held a digital equity roundtable where we virtually convened traditional and non-traditional players working in digital access to learn, to develop a shared understanding of trends, needs, and opportunities in Minnesota and amplify their existing work. And that took place on July 21st, I believe. And some awesome, exciting in-progress work we have happening right now is another round of funding that we're calling community-led investments. And hopefully sometime this fall, we'll be announcing $1.2 million to specifically Black-led and Indigenous-led organizations with more of a Twin Cities focus, but there is some funds for Greater Minnesota organizations as well, using community feedback and expertise. And I think actually some folks on this call may have been involved in some of the initial conversations around that at the Digital Equity Roundtable, where we had a Black-led action group and an Indigenous-led action group that focused that commenced conversations that led to or are leading to grant recommendations for this pot of funding that we have. And then we're also continuing to think through strategy and next steps for our initiative, considering that K-12 learning has returned to in-person, but that doesn't apply to all students, and certainly the Delta variant has made planning difficult and continues to threaten possibilities of in-person learning. But then also, as Jeff mentioned earlier, the divides were still there, are still there. They were still there before the pandemic as well. And so thinking about what role can Connected Minnesota play in reducing those disparities are conversations that we're going to be having in the coming months as we think through the next steps for this important work. And so in the end, what I love to celebrate isn't the work of Connected Minnesota as an initiative, but the work of our grantees, because our grantees are on the front lines of tackling the digital divide in their communities. And so I wanted to take a moment to share a few stories of some of our grantees and the types of projects that they've launched and they've engaged in over the past year or so. So one of our round one grantees was the Northfield Healthy Community Initiative based in Northfield, Minnesota. And they build partnerships and facilitate community collaborations that support value and empower youth in Rice County. And their project connected more than 450 students with internet access. I think it was through Charter Spectrum Services. And they also partnered with bilingual navigators to provide culturally responsive distance learning support to over 700 students. And they also distributed 150 connectivity hotspots to further bolster their impact and reach, with an emphasis on serving the Latinx and Somali families in their community. And then another great grantee is one of our round two grantees, an organization called 30,000 Feet. They are a Roseville-based nonprofit that offers youth educational programs that are centered on the arts, culture, and African American empowerment. And their project expands on a distance learning support program that they had actually launched in September 2020, and we're hoping to continue to get more funding to support. And what that program does is it combines connectivity, a laptop computer, and small group learning opportunities with mentoring, access to food and basic needs, and mental health services. And so around 100 students participated in that program. And These two grantees only scratch the surface of the awesome work that that's being done, and so there are plenty more stories like this on the Connected Minnesota website, which I highly recommend you all check out. And you'll notice at the bottom of this slide there's the URL connectedmn.us. It's spread out in a couple other slides in the presentation, but I'd recommend going to the website, click grantees, and you're able to scroll through the grantees and get a little bit of a flavor of some of the work that they're doing and that we're really proud and privileged to support. So what are key takeaways for us? I'm just going to call out three, and I'm sure there's so many more. The first is that holistic solutions are critical. So access to technology without access to internet or other supportive services can only be a partial solution. And this doesn't just pertain to tech access. So many of our grantees rightfully noted that basic needs support was critical to enabling students to succeed in distance learning. So even if students had sufficient access to technology or internet, they couldn't fully participate in distance learning if those supports weren't available. And so one key example that stands out for me is food and meals, understanding that students, a lot of students got their breakfasts and lunch at school. That type of nutrition was necessary to participate in in-person learning, and it's just as necessary to participate in distance learning. And so a lot of our grantees emphasize providing some of those basic needs support in addition to the other tech pieces to make sure that students could actually engage in learning and distance learning. And then another piece of that, maybe related, is that navigating the tech and internet landscape is just as critical as access to the tech and internet itself. And so what do I mean by that? There's the phrase digital navigation that Jeff has mentioned earlier, and I think Mark, you'll be talking about next. And some of you have experienced this during the pandemic as you yourself navigated the remote work landscape, or as you came alongside your kids to navigate technology and internet during the pandemic. So we can't assume that students and their families can navigate the devices, the software, the internet, or the landscapes to obtain those resources. So digital navigation services, sometimes through a designated digital navigator, help support students and families not only obtain technology and internet, but make sense of and learn and understand those technologies and receive technical support when they run into difficulties or questions. And so it kind of helps us recognize that in a way, access, like if you have the computer or the router in front of you, access without understanding or being able to navigate those technologies isn't really access at all. A second key takeaway for us is listen to communities and students, because they are in the best position to articulate their challenges, their needs, and the potential solutions. And we notice that our grantees do this incredibly well. And for example, those conversations about the needs of digital navigation services bubbled up from their listening to the students and families that they were serving. And so that's a really key takeaway for us. And I will shout that from the mountaintops in terms of making sure, especially whatever entity, but especially funders, listen to grantees and defer to the grantees who are on the ground listening to the families and students in need. And then lastly, consider resources beyond the grant. So these resources can also be being a connector or a facilitator. So being a connector or a facilitator to foster connections and learning across sectors has yielded new relationships and insights, and has been really exciting for us. For example, when we held a learning session for our previous grantees a couple months after our first grant round, it provided a valuable venue for previous grantees to swap lessons and share learning, and it was also a great opportunity for new grantees to learn from the challenges of previous grantees as they were operationalizing their projects. And these grantees came from all across they were nonprofits. Some of them were agencies like the Metin groups, and we've heard various stories of organizations who have pivoted their programming or considered new resources because they were able to learn from and chat with and share with one another. And that also happened at the Digital Equity Roundtable that we hosted this summer, which was really exciting. So I realized that that was a very quick presentation, but I hope that it was a helpful introduction to Connected Minnesota and our work and the lessons we've learned so far. And I'm happy to answer any questions that folks might have. And also recognizing that there are other Connected Minnesota folks on the call right now, I also encourage you to chime in if you have other lessons learned, other takeaways as we're entering this Q&A time.
Yeah, thanks, Dustin. I know that Anne added your link and some other information in the chat, so people can take a look there too. Are there any questions from members of the task force? While you're thinking, maybe think of some. I'm curious, Dustin, just a curious question. You talked a little bit, you alluded a little bit to it. What do you see as your work going forward in the next year or two? Is there anything in particular, other than the things you kind of mentioned about, listening and figuring out what,
Well, honestly, Mark, that's our question in the next couple of months.
Yeah.
We really took that digital equity roundtable as like a space for us to not only hear from folks about some of the issues that they're facing, but using that to help us inform our strategic planning conversations going forward. I think that we're open right now, and really it's about being responsive to what community needs. It's also about being responsive to who is in the room as a partner, and who else do we need to involve if we want to continue making an impact in this space. I know that we're really passionate about the connector role that we've been playing, because it's been a really great role in different respects. There were a couple of action groups that I didn't mention, but there was a fixed wireless action group we had at the roundtable, as well as a digital navigation action group at our roundtable that were exploring, that kind of connected and provided a space for folks to explore further conversations about those potential resources. And so hopefully all of that is going to inform our strategic planning conversations in the months to come.
Good, thanks. So how, Dustin, if members of the task force, or there's a whole lot of other people on the call right now too, they want to get involved or provide feedback to you, or what's their best path for that?
Great question. Well, first of all, if you'd like to stay up to date with some of the work that's happening and that will continue to happen in the coming months, I would say go to the connectedmn.us website and sign up to be on our distribution list. And whenever we do have grant rounds or we have updates, important resources to share, or even updates on our future strategy, we'll send out updates to our email list through through newsletters. And then I'd also say, if you have direct feedback from me, you could email me in a couple of ways. You could email me at my St. Paul, Minnesota address, which is dustin.moretz, Moretz, at spmcf.org. And Anne, if you could put that in the chat, that would be wonderful. And you can also email connectedmn at spmcf.org with feedback or resources or other feedback you have or questions you have about this initiative.
Perfect. And one last question. I'll wait. Anybody from the task force have a question? I'll give them one more chance here.
Yeah, Mark, this is Teddy. I have one for Dustin, and you touched on this a little bit. First of all, thank you for the presentation. That was great. You touched on this a little bit during the presentation, but in your mind and kind of through the experience, what has made these partnerships successful? Like, what are some best practices and lessons learned along the way?
Good question. I think that it's really it's about creating like a space where we're able to really glean from the specific insights of all the different partners. So, for example, understanding we're really privileged to have Landon Foundation at the table, understanding not only their critical work in rural Minnesota and their also experience as a grant maker, having Comcast and Best Buy who have specific experiences with devices and expertise around that, or internet connectivity. And so I think really making sure that all the right partners are in the room that can feed back about, provide important learnings and important contributions to the strategy as well as like grant making priorities and considerations. I think that was really important and certainly something that we're continuing to think of as the work evolves, making sure that the right folks are in the room to be making those decisions around strategy.
And
Go ahead.
I would add there, Teddy, that another huge learning that I would take into any future collaborative work I do, regardless on the issue, is just adaptability and that openness to who should be in the room. Whether, okay, looking at our first grant round, where did the applications come from? Who was missing? We noticed we didn't have a lot of tribal applications in our first round, even though we were hoping to be supporting those communities. And so what extra work, what adaptation, what additional resources were needed to make sure that the door was open and inclusive to those communities, as a specific example. Additionally, we did not make the decision. Our collective, we were the worker bees. We delegated the decision making on grants to an external review committee comprised of experts across kind of the education and digital technology space. And we also adapted that as we went along, because we noticed what voices were missing as we would look at applications, and everyone would kind of sit and think, well, I don't know about that. Okay, well, who does know about that? Who could inform us? They don't represent, every single piece of expertise and wisdom that comes from their own identity, but at least we had kind of a variety and a collective there. So I think that constant adaptability of who's in the room to what Dustin's saying, but being honest about what was missing and being willing to change that, even in a really quick program. Like, we were a 1-year program essentially where we built this, and we changed every month if we needed to and as needed.
Great. Thank you so much for that. That was really insightful.
Yeah, thank you, Dustin and Ann, both. One final question for either or both of you. What can we as a task force do to help you?
I would say, just continue doing the work that you're doing, but also really get connected with community and students and families who are most in need, and then hear about what they have to say. What are resources that they need in order to access the broadband, to access the technology, to access those supportive services that they need to access digital life or thrive in distance learning or learning more generally. And then I would also say that support our grantees and dig into the work that they're doing, because again, they are really on the front lines of tackling the digital divide for us, and it's a true privilege for us to support them. So for me, sometimes I think that I hear that question, I'm like, I feel like it's less about supporting this initiative and more about like, what are the grantees, those folks on the front lines doing, and how can you support them? They come from all across the state, from working in different sectors with different communities, and I think amplifying their work is really important, and supporting their work is really important.
Good, thank you, Dustin and Ann, both, for joining us today. Really appreciate it very much. So thank you.
Thanks for having us, Mark.
Yeah, Teddy, anything?
No, I think we're good. Thank you so much for presenting. Appreciate you making the time and great information. So let's move on to the next section of the education, and it's the last one. So Mark, I think you're also on this one. So
yes.
I'll turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Teddy. Yeah. So this may have been, had we been in person, this may have been the opportunity to see some things, maybe go do a little look around the school at some of the things that we're doing and things like that. So I'm just very briefly going to talk about, because it's been alluded to in the other presentations. Jeff Plowman talked about digital navigation in his talk, and the communities talked about the plight that some of these communities have with broadband access, and of course Dustin and Ann with Connected Minnesota very much talked about digital navigation and that idea. So I thought I would share just a little bit about, my organization, I'm the executive director of ECMEC. ECMEC is a cooperative of school districts in Minnesota, east central Minnesota, up here in Pine, Kanabec, Mille Lacs, Isani, Chisago counties. We have 14 member school districts, as well as Pine Technical and Community College. So we represent 39,000 students in this area of East Central Minnesota, and we're owned by those schools. So we are a school district, but we're a school district that just provides services. So we provide distance learning, instructional technology, information technology and security, professional development, and advocacy. So my work with the task force, my work in broadband advocacy is all based on my bosses, my 14 bosses, my superintendents, desire to have us involved in advocacy because of all the things you've heard today, right? And so that's what ECMEC, part of what ECMEC does. And when the pandemic hit, ECMEC did some data collection. You heard Jeff talk about data collection and the fact that we didn't have a lot of it at the time the pandemic hit, and we really didn't. So we did some surveying of all of our districts and got a really good response and really thought we had some pretty good data that told us that 25 to 30% of our students lacked sufficient broadband to participate in what we thought was going to be effective digital learning, moving into the forced online learning environment that we had when the pandemic started. That's 157,000 households in our area. And you heard the communities talk about the difficult business case that exists for providers, right? That was our challenge. And you heard about poor cellular reception in the area where we're all trees, right? And that's a challenge, right? Affordability, you heard about that. Affordability was a challenge for us. So we had all of these challenges going into distance learning, and lucky for us, along came the Partnership for Connected Minnesota. And we had been talking about, during that time of distance learning, what do we need to do moving forward, assuming that we were going to be in that situation moving forward, which we were. What did we need to do? So we had started to put together some ideas, and it was really wrapping around that digital navigation idea. How do we make sure that we connect our students and families with the best possible broadband we can get them, knowing that we don't have high speed available to so many of our folks? What can we do to help them get connected to it? What can we do to help them make sure that they're successful with their electronic devices? How can we support the families and our students to make sure that they have the best experience we possibly can do? So we did apply and received a grant from the Partnership for Connected Minnesota to do a digital navigator project. So we trained, and Jeff talked about training, we trained 15 digital navigators, one from each of our districts, or two from one of them, and one from each of the others, so that they were local people, right, from the district, and we trained them in some of those aspects of finding solutions. Who are the providers in your area? What are the opportunities they're offering, free and reduced price access, all of these kinds of things. And we trained them in how to do that, and then we set them loose in their districts. At the same time, we also trained a group of folks from the East Central Regional Library, so that there was another source after hours, for people to go to and to reach out further into the community. We also had a little bit of financial support for devices, hotspots, sponsored service, tech support, things like that. But also our districts used resources from the recovery money to provide some of those devices and hotspots and things like that. And I can tell you that among our 14 districts, we distributed hundreds and hundreds of hotspots to folks to try to bridge that gap. We established, you heard some of the things about outdoor, right, locations that someone could at least drive to as a last resort, right, to do their schoolwork and do those kinds of things. We had tech support available for those folks, for those students as well. We connected hundreds and hundreds of students to providers in our area who were offering options for students and families. Many providers in our area stepped up to offer free or reduced prices during the pandemic time. And joining me today is one of our digital navigators, and I thought it would be good to hear directly from someone who did this work. So we have Diana Fetter joining us, who is retired now. I hope that we didn't, push her out with this digital navigator project. But Diana's retired now, but had served Pine City Public Schools for many, many years as a teacher, as a technology integrationist, and other roles in that community and in those schools. So Diana, I know you're with us. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Do you want to introduce yourself and say anything to begin?
Sure. I'm Diana Fetter, and like Mark said, I just retired, and the pandemic and ACMAC had nothing to do with it. It was just time after 36 years, and it was time. And I was one of those people that I just loved every minute of my job and loved what I did. So it's kind of a little different to be retired and, planning my own calendar. But I was happy to be a part of today's discussion. So.
Yeah, thanks, Diana. Just tell us, what did you do as your role, in your role as digital navigator for Pine City Schools?
Well, it was kind of funny because I felt like when the term came up, I felt like this is what I had been doing for the last 12 years, is navigating our way through technology in the schools, and not just for our teachers and our students, but for the families. And when this title came up and this opportunity, I knew it was the right answer for the Pine City Schools community. And they just need a point person. The parents and the students and the community need a point person to answer that phone call when they want to help, when they're in panic mode and they've got a kindergartner who needs to get on a Google Meet call with their teacher, or they're going to be marked absent. The anxiety levels are so high when you take those phone calls that part of the first step in the process is just calming them down and saying, okay, well, let's try a few things and let's work through this. And that was what was so much of it, is just de-escalating that situation so that they weren't angry at the district, angry at things that we can't fix. Let's just make today work. Let's make today work and it'll be okay. And there was a lot of that. And just building their confidence. I started to, see that I was answering the same question. And so I would make a video and we'd throw it on our website. And then pretty soon they were self-advocating and saying, I didn't find a video for this. Am I not looking in the right place? And it was like, well, let me make one for you. And pretty soon we even had one where I had a great conversation with a junior high boy, and we made the video together on how to restart his Chromebook so that it would work. And so he was so excited to be a part of the training process. So that was huge. But it's not just the technology, and it's going back to that whole concept of the point person. So many times they were like, I don't know how to get my lunches. Where do I go to get the lunches? I didn't get the email. I didn't see it on Facebook. And so it was like, well, here, this is the person we need to talk to. And let me just fire off a message, and pretty soon I'd have that answer. So that was a luxury that I had with 36 years of service. But just connecting them to those support systems and making sure that they could check in was a huge part. I don't know how much further you want me to go into it, Mark, but we had 400 hotspots that we had in our inventory that we were able to get through the ESSER, or the funding, the pandemic funding, and we were giving those out, and it was great. They were so relieved. When we were in that first situation in the spring of 2020, there was chaos, and we were printing papers, and we were mailing papers, and we were delivering papers, and we didn't know where they were going and how we were going to get them back. But when we had the hotspots to give out, that was amazing. The anxiety level just went down. But we could not solve the problem for probably 8 to 10 families, and that was because of where they lived. We tried different providers. We tried different, move here in the house. Let's give you 2 of them. We did so much troubleshooting with them, and ultimately, at one point, one mom in the winter was loading her kids up and parking in her minivan and sitting outside our doors so that she could have reliable internet so her kids could go to school. And I mean, that mom, I still have a great relationship with her, and I just saw her and she said, "What am I going to do now that you're retired?" So I assured her that I would always answer her phone call. But you know, it's the beauty of a small town. We built those relationships, and they knew that I would always answer their call, and I'm sure that's what all of the navigators did. So.
Perfect. Well, Diane, you did an excellent job of reading my questions ahead of time of what I was going to ask you. You know, so you've talked about some of the successes you experienced, some of the challenges that you faced, and you and I both know our time is short. So I'm going to throw it out to the task force and see if anybody on the task force has a specific question for you that they want you to spend 30 more seconds on. Looks like Yvonne does.
Thanks for a great overview, Diana. I'm curious about, you had obviously decades of experience in the district and in the community. What sorts of things should be in a digital navigator training program for someone who perhaps hasn't been, working at the school district, but who is in the local community?
Oh, that's a really great question, Yvonne. And we were fortunate enough that Mark put together a great resource that had the internet options. But I think one of the other things that would be nice is just an organizational chart that's current with the school district that has who to contact if it's a health issue, who to contact if it's a food service issue. What about if it's a custodian's issue? They need to get into school because they need whatever. I mean, sometimes that organizational chart so that you can provide them with a name and an email, because that's what they want. And some of those basic, as in my role, I was always able to help them find a password or reset those things, because so often that's what scares them. But even having a resource that's leveled with a scope and sequence that says, say, maybe in first grade, they're using IXL, but in third grade, they're using this, so that you can really maybe say, well, maybe you're not on the right website. Can I send you the right link? Or making sure that you're familiar with the school website. Those are the things that come to mind right away.
Sure, thanks. Thanks, Yvonne, for that question. Any others? Not seeing any. Diana, anything come to mind that the task force can do to help schools like Pine City and others, obviously, moving forward?
Anything you can do to help make sure that we've got, Pine County is not a rich county, and we need to be able to have equitable access. We have devices for all of our kids, but the point is moot if they can't get to the services that we can provide. And having that access that they can afford, and it gets to their, home that's so rural that they, have trees all around and it's just in the middle of those overlapping circles, is just so important that they want to learn and they want to do the right thing. They want to parent. They want to provide their children with opportunities, but these are so big that they can't get past them.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Diana. And then I know, sorry, it was super short, but you did a fabulous job of encapsulating that in 5 minutes, of what the work that you did and the work that and you're right, the other digital navigators did very similar work, but again, as you heard, every community, every school district is different. So they did have different things that they did. And I will tell the task force and others that we did do a little 10-minute video about our project that has some information and has Diana is featured in it along with 2 other of our digital navigators, and we will post that video link in either the minutes or on the website where the meeting materials are. So thank you, Diana, for joining us. Really appreciate it. And sorry, Teddy, I went over by 6 minutes on this whole thing, but I'm hoping that's okay. And I want to thank the task force for allowing me to put this agenda together and bring these folks and their information to you. And I sincerely hope that there was some information there that helps us and helps all of you as we formulate and start moving forward with our recommendation process. So thank you for that opportunity, Teddy. Thank you, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, no, great job, Mark. Kind of putting all this together. I think that was tremendous. Lots of information actually covered in a short period of time, which was great though. But it really emphasizes why broadband is important in all communities, and education is one of those fundamental pieces. So again, it would have been great to be there face to face and be able to meet some of the presenters and even do the lunch there at the school. But I missed that. But hopefully, maybe we can do this again, and we can even bring some of the same presenters, depending on a year later, after maybe we got some more funding and more projects are underway. There's been progress, so I would look forward to that. But again, thank you for coordinating that. Thank you for putting together the presenters and great information shared here today. Okay, so we get to the last piece of our agenda today before we open it up for any kind of last minute comments, but it's just an update from the subgroups. We're not going to go into depth on this meeting. We'll have additional meetings in the future to go deeper with the subgroups, but just kind of wanted to get an update on what's happened since we last met, just a quick bullet points here and there. So maybe Yvonne, I'll start with you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Well, with the group, we met on August 17th with Ed from Libraries Without Borders, and he gave a great presentation. On September 21st, we're going to get a presentation from 2 of the tribal communities. Excited about that. And we're starting to map out some recommendations. We have a shared document. We're just starting to sketch out some beginning ideas for some recommendations that we'll be discussing in our next meeting.
Perfect. Great. Thank you, Yvonne. And it sounds like there's some progress being made there. So that's great to hear. Paul, I believe you're on.
Yeah, thanks, Teddy. We had a meeting a couple of weeks ago, met with Scott just to kind of give him some committee thoughts on kind of the unserved topic and reference point of the report from last year. Really kind of give him just some food for thought as he begins putting the report together. So I'm not sure if we'll have any additional meetings, but at least just to give Scott some ideas on how to get that portion of it started, I think we're on our way.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Paul. And then I saw Nolan, but he was just about to leaving. So Nolan, are you still there? Don't see Nolan. So maybe Bernadine or Steve, you can give a quick update on, I believe you had a meeting on the last, Bernadine, you're on mute. We see you talking.
Sorry.
Yeah,
thanks so much. Yeah, thanks, Teddy. We, our subcommittee did have a good meeting recently, last week, I think, and it was great to have Scott Cole with us. Thanks, Scott, for joining to help note take. And we are moving ahead on thinking through a couple recommendations that we're going to bring forward to task force for consideration. One concerning the grant program and sort of the speed requirements built in there, and the other on mapping. And so we are looking forward to digging in a little bit to put the shape and the details around that resolution for the full task force to look at.
Okay. Awesome. So it sounds like you're making great progress as well, and starting to shape some recommendations. And I did hear twice now that Scott was engaged, which thank you, Scott, for participating with the subgroups. And I think that will help shape some of the recommendations. And also I think we're going to change the format of the document so that will all come together. And I'm excited to see how that unfolds. And, per the discussion we had earlier in the year, we will have more time at the task force to discuss some of the recommendation and go a little bit deeper versus just reading the document. So starting to formulate what some of those recommendations might be now will be great, because that will be the basis for discussing later.
And can I add just a quick comment, Teddy?
Yep, I was just about to see if you had a comment. So
thanks. I just wanted to alert all of the subgroup leaders to be on the lookout for template that we're going to use to help collect the information from each group in a little bit more uniform fashion, so that it'll be easier for us to synthesize all of the great feedback that's going to come from each of the subgroups. So be on the lookout for that template later today or late tomorrow.
Great, thank you, Scott. Okay, so that is the kind of the meat of the meeting with all the topics we had planned for. Are there any other questions, comments that anyone on the task force would like to make at this point in time? Bernadine, go ahead.
Yeah, hi Teddy, thanks. Just wanted to put a shout out to make sure that all the task force was aware that in addition to the statewide broadband meeting that we dropped a link in October, the 12th to the 14th, beginning tomorrow is a series of 7 regional broadband gatherings that are being coordinated across the state in collaboration with all of our regional economic development commissions, the RDCs, and the initiative foundations across the state. And tomorrow there are 3 of them happening, and then there'll be the other 4 in the lead up to the statewide conference. And the goal of those meetings is to really bring the opportunities and challenges our rural communities are facing to the attention of our local elected officials, especially our township supervisors and county commissioners and other local city officials. So I just encourage you, if you have a special interest, either if you live outstate or special interest in a certain part of the state, that same link to the broadband statewide conference includes all the details, links, dates, and times for these other 8 regional meetings. And part of the statewide conference in October will be bringing forward what we're hearing from the state through all of that convening. So just a heads up, an opportunity to participate if you have interest.
Great, thank you for letting us know, Bernadine. It's great. Brian?
Just a quick comment. I've heard a little bit of rumbling that there's some discussion on maybe asking the Office of Broadband Development to move forward with the application process before the Treasury determines, the actual rules, just to be able to see if we can't jumpstart that process to get it going. Is there any more discussion on that? Maybe Angie and Diane could share some comments.
Go ahead, Anne. Yeah.
Yes, we've heard some of those rumblings as well, but I think at this point in time, we're hopeful that we're going to hear more from Treasury by the end of the month. And without a special session on the near horizon, I think we're just going to stay the course right now. Again, encourage folks to continue their work on putting projects together, and our intent is to follow the current parameters in the border-to-border program, unless Treasury asks us to do something different. And I guess along those lines, I would tell folks to look at what has been put forward with the state and local fiscal recovery funds, perhaps as a guide. But unfortunately, we are all in this same boat with the communities and providers looking to get projects started. We are at the mercy of federal funding right now. So.
Thanks, Angie.
Yeah.
Thank you, Angie. Other questions, comments? Bernadine?
Yeah, I would just point out that we are at the mercy of federal funding guidelines right now because of choices our state legislature made about how to fund the grant program. And I think that I'm hoping that one of the messages that come forward in our task force report is to help our legislators understand the consequences of that choice and not lose sight of the fact that we need to, as a state, be prepared to continue to make investments in broadband access and adoption. And this sort of pass has put us where we are today with possibly looking at, missing a whole round of grant funding. So I'm hoping that we can, as we move towards our report, that we will bring forward that narrative so that legislature understands the consequences of the way they decided to fund our grant program this year.
Yeah. Other comments? Okay, any other comments from anyone outside of the task force that you'd like to make at this point in time? Okay, not seeing any hands or hearing anything else. So with that, thank you everyone for making the time to